There's something about the dead of night that strips away reason. When the world falls silent, and even the wind seems to hold its breath, something else listens. It's in those hours between midnight and 3, when shadows stretch too long and every sound seems wrong, that the veil between the living and the other side wears thin. These aren't tales whispered around campfires or dreamed up for clicks. These are 3 terrifying true stories, experienced by people who swear they were never the same after what they saw ... or what saw them. So turn off the lights if you dare and listen closely, because these real-life nightmares happened when the world was asleep, and the darkness was very much awake. These are 3 creepy, true dead-of-night horror stories. Story 1. The night was bitter cold, and the small countryside town lay blanketed in stillness. A young man named Harris had just moved into an old farmhouse on the edge of the woods. It had stood empty for years, the kind of place locals warned newcomers about with half-hearted smiles and nervous glances. Harris, unfazed by rumors, was drawn to the quiet and isolation. He didn't mind the creaky floorboards or the dim hallways. In fact, he liked how disconnected it felt from the rest of the world. That night he lit a fire, made some tea, and settled into bed. Outside the wind picked up, and tree branches scraped lightly against the windows. He glanced at the clock, 2:46 a.m. Just as he turned off the lamp, something changed. A strange pressure filled the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. The next moment was subtle, but undeniable. A faint shuffling sound echoed from the hallway. At first Harris assumed it was the old wood contracting in the cold, but the sound didn't match. It was deliberate, like bare feet moving slowly across wooden boards. He sat up, heart pounding. The wind outside had stopped entirely, the trees were still, but the footsteps inside were growing louder. They paused right outside his bedroom door. Then silence. No knock, no creak, just complete, suffocating stillness. He stared at the door, expecting the handle to turn, but nothing happened. Minutes passed. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the pressure in the room vanished. He checked the time, 2:48 a.m. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The following day, Harris tried to rationalize what he'd heard. Maybe a raccoon had gotten inside. Maybe he was just overly sensitive to sounds in a new environment. But the hallway had no signs of entry. That evening he forced himself to relax, even leaving the bedroom door open. Midnight passed quietly. At 2:46 a.m., his chest grew tight again. The pressure returned, thick and unnatural. He checked the hallway, empty, but at exactly 2:47 a.m., the footsteps resumed. This time, they started from the far end of the house, moving steadily closer. They stopped just outside his room again. But with the door open, Harris could see no one was there. Yet, the sound continued. It was like invisible feet were pacing just beyond the threshold. The clock ticked to 2:48 a.m., and once again, everything stopped. He left the lights on for the rest of the night. On the 3rd night, he placed salt across the doorway, an old superstition he'd heard from his grandmother. He also set up his phone camera to record the hallway. The usual routine unfolded calm until 2:46, pressure building at 2:47, and then the sound. This time, the footsteps were heavier, like something was dragging its limbs. The salt at the door remained untouched, yet the sound circled the room slowly, pausing near the windows and the closet. His camera captured nothing, just audio distortion and faint clicks when the sound reached the hallway. At 2:48 a.m., the presence vanished once again, but when he reviewed the video, a detail chilled his blood. At 2:47, the audio cut out for exactly 60 seconds. No static, no movement, just complete dead air. It was as if time itself had frozen for 1 minute. By the 4th night, Harris had grown paranoid. He boarded up the windows, locked every door, and pushed a dresser in front of his bedroom entrance. He kept the lights on and watched the clock tick with mounting dread. 2:46. The pressure returned, stronger than before. It felt like the walls were closing in. Then, something new whispers. Indistinct, overlapping voices that came from inside the room, despite it being empty. The air turned icy cold. At 2:47, the dresser shuddered. Once, then again. Something on the other side was trying to get in, but not with violence, with patience. Slow, persistent nudges against the barrier, as if testing his resolve. The voices grew louder, but not clearer. His breath fogged in the freezing air, then silence. The clock read to 48. The room warmed. The whispers stopped. The dresser no longer moved. He didn't fall asleep at all that night. Nor did he the next. On the 5th night, he made the decision to leave, but something in the house wouldn't let him. As 2:46 approached, The lights flickered violently and then went out completely. The fire died in the hearth. His phone battery, which had been at 85%, drained to zero in an instant. He was plunged into blackness. He crawled into the closet, the only place that didn't feel watched. From within, he heard the door creak open, not forced welcomed. Something had entered, something no longer hiding in the hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath its weight. But this time, it didn't stop at the door. The pressure in the room built to unbearable levels. He could feel it all breathing, Ancient standing just inches from the closet. There was no time, no whisper, just a slow, dragging breath on the other side of the wooden slats. 2:47 a.m., and then, nothing. Not silence, not release, just void. He doesn't remember anything after that moment. The next morning, he woke up on the living room floor, covered in dirt. His closet was empty. The salt line had been scattered, not stepped overthrown. His phone was back on the nightstand with 75% battery, as if untouched. But when he played back the recording, there was no image, only audio, breathing, deep, primal breathing that stopped exactly at 2:48 a.m. Harris never stayed another night in that house. He left everything behind. The farmhouse still stands, but no one buys it, not even for free. And every night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., a faint pressure fills the air waiting for the next visitor to listen. Story 2. The apartment was small but perfect for Adil, who had just started working the night shift at a local security firm. It was on the 10th floor of a high-rise on the edge of the city. The building was old but sturdy, and the rent was affordable. His unit faced a quiet alleyway and had large glass windows that overlooked the rooftops below. At night, the city lights flickered in the distance, and the wind howled between the buildings. Adil liked the silence. After his shift, he would come home, shower, and sleep during the day. But at night, right around the time the world went quiet, he often found himself staring at the glass without knowing why. It started with something simple. One night, after coming home around 3 a.m., Adil noticed a faint smudge on the outside of the glass window. It was shaped like a handprint, but too large to be human. He assumed it was condensation or some leftover mark from the cleaning crew. He wiped it away and forgot about it. But the next morning, it was back, same size, same spot. The prints were always on the outside, and Adil lived 10 floors up with no balconies. Birds couldn't have done it. No one could have reached it. He shrugged it off again, though unease began to creep into his thoughts. That night, while lying in bed, he caught something out of the corner of his eye. A subtle movement, a shift in the reflection. He turned quickly, but nothing was there, just the alley and the rooftops below. A week passed, and the unease grew heavier. Every night, like clockwork, the smudge reappeared, always at the same time. Just after 3 a.m., Adil began leaving the lights on, hoping it would help. But the lights only made it worse. The brighter the room, the clearer the glass became manned with it, the sense that something was watching from the other side. It was never visible directly, but its presence was undeniable. A vibration in the air. A sensation in the spine. At one point, Adil even covered the window with thick curtains, but they would always be drawn open by morning, with the print waiting behind them. The city below remained silent. No neighbors noticed. No reports of break-ins or strange activity. Whatever it was meant only for him. Then came the night when the handprint changed. It was no longer flat against the glass, but smeared as if it had dragged downward, slowly, leaving a faint trail. Adil felt sick looking at it. That same night, he heard tapping. Not a knock, not wind. A slow, deliberate tap-tap, like a finger on the glass. It stopped when he turned toward it, but started again as soon as he looked away. He didn't sleep that night. When the sun rose, he checked the outside once again. Nothing, no ledge, no way anyone could have reached it. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had reached him. The glass now felt colder than the rest of the apartment, not from the weather but from something else entirely. By the 4th week, the presence had escalated. Adil began hearing breathing not from within the room, but from behind the glass, shallow, steady inhales that fogged a portion of the pane. The fog would slowly fade, only to return again as if the source had never left. He stopped opening the curtains. He stopped looking at the clock. But even when he avoided the window entirely, he still felt drawn to it, like invisible strings pulling his head toward the glass. One morning, after a sleepless night, he noticed something etched into the window. It wasn't visible unless the light hit it just right. A long vertical scratch like a fingernail had dragged across it with pressure. It was on the inside. That changed everything. Panic began to seep into Adil's days. He tried staying at a friend's house, but the restlessness followed him. He returned home the next evening, and the window was different. The entire glass now seemed fogged-like. Someone had pressed their face against it for hours. His stomach twisted. That night, the tapping returned, louder, more impatient, and just before dawn, the reflection in the glass didn't match his movements. It was subtle, a half-second delay, but enough to break reality. The reflection blinked before he did. It moved when he was perfectly still. He staggered back from the glass, heart racing, not daring to go near it again. The curtains remained closed after that, tightly bound, but it didn't stop the sound. Every night at 3 a.m., the tapping resumed, accompanied by breathing and faint scratches, as though something was trapped just behind the pane, getting more desperate. Then came the final night. Adil had installed blackout boards over the window, sealing it completely. But at 3 a.m., he woke to the sound of glass breaking, not loud, not shattering, just a subtle crack. He turned on the light. One of the blackout panels had fallen, and through the small exposed section of the window, he saw it. Not a face, not a person, just a shape. A dark outline with impossibly long fingers pressed against the glass. Not on the outside, on the inside. Adil froze. The fingers began tapping again, not impatiently this time, but rhythmically, like a countdown. Each tap grew louder, more violent. Then the room went dark. Not from the lights. From the window it had turned black, pitch black, as if whatever was behind it had finally stepped through. By the time the sun rose, the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no broken glass. The boards were back in place. The handprint was gone. Only Adil's phone remained on the bed, recording audio. For 5 minutes, nothing but silence. Then, a sound. Breathing, followed by a whisper, deep and wet, so close to the microphone that it distorted the recording. When the landlord entered later that day, he found no tenant, no signs of life, just the faintest imprint on the inside of the glass window. A smudge, not of a hand but a face, watching, waiting, and every night at 3 a.m., someone on the 10th floor hears the tapping again. Story 3. It was an ordinary apartment bathroom, a sink, a small cabinet, a frosted window, and a mirror, wide and simple, mounted above the sink. Nothing unusual, except that every tenant who had lived in that unit had requested to leave within 3 months. Sana didn't believe in haunted objects or bad omens. She moved into the unit because the rent was low, the building was quiet, and she needed to be close to her new job. Her life was finally starting to feel stable again. The first few days were uneventful. The place had a weird smell at first, but nothing a few candles couldn't fix. The only oddity she noticed was how cold the bathroom got at night. Even with the door closed and the heater on, it felt like stepping into a freezer. Still, she brushed it off. Every building had quirks. One night, after a long shift, Sana was brushing her teeth around 2:50 a.m. She was exhausted, barely keeping her eyes open. As she leaned over the sink, she caught a flicker of movement in the mirror, not behind her, but within the reflection itself. Like a blink that wasn't hers. She turned round quickly. Nothing. She stared at her own face, tired and pale, then laughed at herself. She was just overtired. Still, when she went to bed that night, she left the bathroom light on, just in case. At 3:03 a.m., something woke her. A soft creak, not from the floor or the hallway, but the bathroom door slowly swinging open on its own. The light was still on. The mirror, visible from her bed, was dark. The next day, Sana told herself she had forgotten to close the door properly. But a feeling had started growing quiet and steady that something was wrong. That evening, she avoided the bathroom mirror altogether. She kept the door closed and used the mirror in her bedroom instead. But just before 3 a.m., she heard it again. The bathroom door opened with that same gentle creak. She tried to ignore it. The next morning, the mirror had fogged over, even though the bathroom had not been used, and across the fog, long drag marks stretched from top to bottom as if someone had slowly run their fingers across it from inside. That day, she bought cleaning supplies and wiped everything down. She placed a small towel over the mirror. But by the following night, the towel had fallen to the floor. Her reflection waited for her again. On the 4th night, Sana stayed awake intentionally. She wanted to see what was happening, convinced now that it wasn't her imagination. At 2:55 a.m., she entered the bathroom and stared at the mirror. Nothing unusual, just her own tired eyes. She stood silently, heart racing, watching the second hand on her watch creep toward 3 a.m. As the time struck, something changed. The air grew dense, heavier than before. Her reflection seemed slower. She moved her hand. The mirror followed, but with the slightest delay. She stepped closer. Her reflection smiled. She did not. Her body froze, too afraid to move. The reflection continued smiling, then began to raise its hand slowly, fingers stretching unnaturally long. Sana bolted out of the bathroom and slammed the door shut behind her. She barely slept that night, and when morning came, she found the mirror completely clean. Not a smudge, not a scratch like it had been wiped by invisible hands. Determined to understand what was happening, she began researching the apartment. Hidden in old internet threads and obscure message boards, she found fragments of rumor stories about a mirror in that very building. Tenants who claimed to see things they couldn't explain. One said their reflection tried to mimic their thoughts. Another said it whispered to them at night. No one ever stayed long, and none of them ever looked into the mirror after 3 a.m. more than once. The building manager refused to talk about it, but the final post she found chilled her. If you ever see your reflection smile without you, don't look away. It's not done with you yet. That night she tried to cover the mirror with duct tape and cardboard. She avoided the bathroom entirely, but at 3:07 a.m., the lights flickered in her apartment. Then she heard the sound again, the slow creak of the bathroom door opening, even though she had locked it. Her phone began vibrating violently, and when she checked it, a single message appeared on the screen, with no sender. You looked. Now it knows you. Her blood ran cold. She didn't sleep at all. The bathroom light stayed on until dawn, when she finally dared to check the room. The mirror had cracked slightly, just a thin fracture running down the center like a tear. The next night would be her last in the apartment. She had already packed a bag and planned to leave in the morning, but something drew her to the bathroom one final time. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe it was something else. At 2:59 a.m., she stepped into the room and stood before the broken mirror. It was dark and still. She stared at herself, breathing slowly, waiting for it to begin. The clock ticked over to 3 a.m. Her reflection blinked twice. She did not. The crack in the mirror began to widen, but not like broken glass. It stretched like skin, bending outward, warping. Her reflection began to lean forward without her. It stepped out of sync. One foot, then another. Still smiling, Sana couldn't move. Her body refused to obey. The reflection raised a finger and touched a glass from inside. A ripple moved through the surface, and then it stepped out. Sana screamed, but no sound came. The lights exploded in the apartment. Everything went black. When the power returned at sunrise, the apartment was quiet. The mirror was whole again, perfectly clean, but the reflection inside no longer matched the room. It was slightly off. A toothbrush was missing. The towels were folded differently, and the figure brushing its hair wasn't Sana. She was never seen again. The new tenant that moved in a month later said the apartment was fine, except for the mirror, which made them feel strange sometimes. They laughed it off, but neighbors reported odd things. The lights flickering around 3 a.m., a soft creaking sound in the hallway, and once, just once, someone saw a figure in the bathroom window from the alley below staring down with an unnatural smile. Long after the unit had been declared vacant. Story 4. After years of trying, Farhan and Amina finally had a baby girl. They named her Zoya. The couple moved into a quiet suburban home to raise her in peace, far from the city's chaos. The house was cozy, with a soft carpeted nursery upstairs and pastel walls Amina had painted herself. Everything felt perfect. To help ease their nerves as new parents, they installed a baby monitor, one of those audio-only models with a wide microphone range. It gave them peace of mind, letting them hear every little coo and cry. At night, while Zoya slept in her crib, they'd sit downstairs listening to the soft, static hum of the monitor, always alert for the tiniest sound. The first few nights passed without incident. Zoya barely cried, but then, something strange happened. On the 7th night, around 2:30 a.m., the monitor crackled. Farhan was half asleep on the couch when he heard what he thought was a whisper. He turned the volume up. Static buzzed, then silence. Then a faint murmur. It sounded like a man's voice, but it wasn't clear, just low, steady syllables in a tone that didn't match a baby's room. Assuming it was interference from another device, he unplugged the unit and went upstairs to check. Zoya was asleep. The window was locked. No strange noises in the room itself. When he returned, he chalked it up to radio overlap or a neighbor's signal bleeding through. But the next night, it happened again, this time, earlier. At exactly 2:16 a.m., the monitor let out a soft pop, followed by heavy breathing. Not like Zoya's tiny snores, but something deeper, almost adult. Amina was awake too and heard it. She looked at Farhan with wide eyes, neither of them sure what they were listening to. Then, a strange clicking sound echoed through the speaker, like fingernails tapping on wood. No crying, no movement from Zoya, just that rhythmic tapping. They rushed upstairs. Again, Zoya was sound asleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. No sign of anything unusual. A couple checked every inch of the room. Nothing. They returned to the living room shaken, but still trying to believe it was a technical glitch. That night, they left the monitor off, but curiosity got the better of them. On the 9th night, they turned the monitor back on and began recording the audio output with their phones. For over 2 hours, nothing happened. Then, at 2:23 a.m., the breathing returned. But this time, it was accompanied by faint humming, a slow, tuneless melody that neither of them recognized. Farhan's blood ran cold. It didn't sound like a radio. It was too close to present, like someone standing in the room just inches from the microphone. Then the humming stopped, and a low, rasping voice said something they couldn't fully make out. One word was clear: mine. That was all. Then silence. They ran upstairs with their phones still recording. Zoya was still in her crib, but the air felt colder than the rest of the house. Much colder. On the 10th night, they called a technician to check the monitor. He found nothing wrong, no cross-frequency signals, no feedback loops. It was working perfectly. That night, they left it on one final time, desperate to prove to themselves that it was nothing. But the monitor had changed. The static was gone. Now, it was silent until 2 a.m. And when the sound began, it didn't fade in, it snapped into existence. Breathing, closer than before. Then soft footsteps, as if pacing the nursery floor. And then, unmistakably, a wooden creak, like the crib being gently rocked. They raced upstairs again, but this time, the mobile hanging above the crib was spinning wildly, even though the window was shut. Zoya was awake, staring at something across the room they couldn't see. Her expression wasn't fear. It was focus, like she was listening. That was the last night they ever used the baby monitor. They threw it out the next morning. Life seemed to return to normal for a while. Zoya continued to grow, cheerful and healthy. But even without the monitor, strange things began to happen. At night they'd hear small creaks from upstairs. Doors would be ajar in the morning. Toys that had been packed away were suddenly lying in the middle of the floor. And sometimes Zoya would point to the corner of her room and laugh at nothing. When asked what she was looking at, she would tilt her head and say a single word they had never taught her. That became more frequent as months passed. Always meant, always pointing to the same corner. Then came the night Zoya began speaking in her sleep. Not baby babble, clear phrases. Farhan and Amina once recorded her whispering a lullaby neither of them had ever heard. Another night she mumbled a sentence that chilled them. He said, "I belong to him now." Her voice was soft, matter of fact, the same phrase repeated twice before she fell silent. They sought help from religious authorities, spiritual counselors, even pediatric therapists. No one could explain what was happening. The house was blessed, cleansed, but the phenomena didn't stop. One night, while reviewing old recordings from the baby monitors just out of desperation, they found something neither of them had noticed before. A quiet audio pattern, hidden beneath the static, a voice repeating the same sequence over and over. She's mine, she's mine, she's mine. Eventually they moved out, sold the house at a loss, and relocated to a different city. The activity stopped entirely after that. But even years later, when Zoya was 5, she sometimes woke up crying from dreams she couldn't explain. She would tell her parents about a mirror in a dark room and a voice that hummed while rocking her to sleep. When they asked her who it was, she would only say, "The man from the monitor." She didn't remember his face, but she said he always came at 2:23 a.m. and he always smiled when she cried. No one has lived in that house since. It's still listed for rent, the price dropping every few months. And according to the neighbors, late at night, the lights in the nursery flicker. Sometimes, they swear they hear humming through the thin walls, soft, slow, and very, very close. Story 5. The hiking trail was supposed to be closed for the season, but Bilal and his cousin Raza had ignored the signs. It was late October, the air crisp and cold, and they had planned the weekend trip for weeks. The forest around them was vast and silent, except for the occasional caw of distant birds. Cell signals were spotty at best, which made it perfect for unplugging from the world. They set up camp by a dried-up creek bed, the closest signs of civilization, a 2-hour hike back toward the main road. That first night was peaceful. The fire crackled, and the stars were brighter than either of them had ever seen. But as darkness crept deeper into the woods, a strange feeling settled over the area, like the forest had gone too quiet, as if something was listening. The next morning Bilal discovered his phone had received a voicemail during the night, despite no signal. That in itself was strange, but the timestamp made it stranger. It had been received at 3:17 a.m. while both of them were fast asleep. Thinking it might be an emergency message sent during a brief moment of signal, he played it. The voicemail began with a loud burst of static, followed by faint breathing. Then, a voice whispered something unintelligible. The audio quality was poor, warped like an old tape. As he replayed it, one phrase became barely audible. "Help. Behind." That was all. Raza laughed it off, claiming it was a prank or a glitch. But Bilal couldn't shake the feeling that the voice sounded familiar. Too familiar, like his own voice, distorted by fear. They continued the day as planned, exploring the surrounding woods. But Bilal couldn't stop glancing behind him, heart racing every time a branch snapped or leaves rustled. When they returned to camp in the evening, he noticed something else odd. His backpack had been unzipped, though he was certain he'd left it closed. Nothing was missing. But his phone was now placed on top of the sleeping bag. He hadn't left it there. It had been in the pack. They checked for footprints, animal tracks, anything. Nothing. That night Bilal didn't sleep well. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers. At 3:17 a.m. his phone lit up again. Another voicemail, this time without a missed call. It played automatically, breathing. Then his name, not shouted, not spoken, just breathed, slowly and clearly. Bilal. By the third day the woods no longer felt safe. Everything appeared normal on the surface, birds chirping, sunlight filtering through the branches. But the feeling had changed. Like the forest was watching. At afternoon, they decided to cut the trip short. As they packed up, Bilal's phone rang again. Despite no signal, the screen simply read, "Unknown." He didn't answer, but a voicemail arrived immediately afterward. He played it on speaker. The voice was clearer this time, definitely his. But broken, trembling. "Don't leave the woods. It's already outside." Then a scream, short, cut off, and silence. The forest seemed to pause around them. Not a leaf moved. Not a bird chirped. They broke camp in minutes and started hiking back toward the main trail without a word. As they walked, the environment began to shift subtly. The trail markers they had followed on the way in were gone. Trees looked wrong, like they had moved or twisted somehow. Raza's compass spun aimlessly. The further they walked, the deeper they seemed to go. Bilal's phone died suddenly. Despite being fully charged that morning, Raza's phone turned off next. Panic set in as the forest began to darken earlier than expected. The sun seemed to vanish behind thick gray clouds. By nightfall, they were still walking with no sign of the main road. And then, they heard it. Not animals, not wind. A voice calling from deeper in the woods. Calling Bilal's name, not loudly, gently. The same voice from the voicemail. They ran. The voice followed. At some points it was ahead of them, at others, behind. Always calm, always knowing. They stumbled into a clearing where the ground was littered with old camping gear, moldy sleeping bags, and half-buried shoes, signs that others had been there and never made it out. Raza wanted to scream, but they kept running. Eventually, exhausted and frozen, they collapsed beneath a thick tree and huddled in silence. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. That night, no calls came, no voicemails, but Bilal had a dream. He was standing in the woods, alone, looking at his own body lying on the ground, mouth open in a silent scream. Behind him, tall, pale shapes watched without eyes. When he woke up, Raza was gone. The sun had just risen, and the forest felt emptier. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks, just Raza's phone, placed neatly on a rock, blinking with a new voicemail. Bilal picked it up with shaking hands. The message had no timestamp, no number. It played automatically. The voice was Raza's, weak, fading. "Don't follow the voice. Don't listen. It isn't me anymore." That was all. The phone powered off. Bilal staggered through the woods in a daze, unsure how long he walked. Eventually, he stumbled onto a dirt road and collapsed. A ranger found him hours later, shivering and unable to speak. Back in the city, after days in the hospital, he tried to explain what happened. No one believed him. The forest was searched, but no traces of Raza were ever found. Only the old campsite, and scattered gear that had clearly belonged to multiple people. Bilal eventually got a new phone, but he never used it after dark. One night while staring at it on his nightstand, it lit up. No call, just a voicemail notification, one unheard message. With trembling fingers, he played it. A soft whisper. Behind and silence. Story 6. The houses on Ridley Lane were mostly empty. Once a lively suburban neighborhood, it had decayed over time. Shops closed, families moved out, and the trees grew thick, casting long shadows even in daylight. But at the far end of the lane stood a house that had never sold. It wasn't boarded up or burned out. In fact, it looked perfectly maintained. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, and lights that flickered on at night. The neighbors, what few remained, avoided speaking about it. The house had no listed owner, yet the lawn stayed cut and the porch swept. Anyone who moved in never stayed more than a week, and after the last man vanished without a trace, no one tried again. Until Anas, he was young, practical, and too broke to question why the rent was so cheap. The agent barely made eye contact when handing over the keys, muttering something about low turnover and legal silence. Anas laughed it off. He moved in with a mattress, some old furniture, and his computer. The house had no smell, no creaks, everything was to clean. The first night was silent, not peaceful. Silent, no traffic sounds, no wind through the trees. The silence pressed against the windows like a physical weight. Still, he slept. But just after 3 a.m. he awoke. Suddenly no noise, no reason, just a gut-wrenching jolt. He stared into the dark hallway for a long time before falling back asleep. The second night, things shifted. As Anas explored the house further, he noticed strange details. The mirrors seemed too reflective, like they showed more than just his image. The hallway light flickered every time he passed it. In the attic, he found a thick layer of dust, but only in a perfect rectangle, like something large had once been there and was now gone. That night he kept a flashlight near his bed. Again, at 3 a.m. sharp, he awoke. This time, there was a noise, a distant creaking, followed by a soft scraping like someone dragging their hand along the hallway walls. He sat up, listening. The noise stopped when he held his breath, but just as he lay back down, he heard the sound again. On the third night, Anas decided to leave his phone recording audio while he slept. In the morning, he found something disturbing. At exactly 3 a.m., the microphone picked up a whisper. Not loud, not angry, just there. It said his name. Then came the sound of footsteps, low, deliberate, moving through the house, into his room, and stopping by his bed. He remembered nothing, but the audio continued for 4 more minutes, capturing heavy breathing and a strange clicking noise, like fingernails tapping glass. When he played the file again later, the recording had corrupted. Only silence remained. That day he tried calling the agent, but the number had been disconnected. By the fourth night, Anas was paranoid. He checked every lock twice. He closed all doors, left lights on, and stayed up reading, trying to drown the dread. But the moment the clock ticked to 3 a.m., the lights dimmed, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the house. He grabbed his flashlight, but the batteries were dead. As his eyes adjusted, he noticed something horrifying. The hallway was darker than the rest of the house, as if the shadows there were heavier. He stayed frozen, listening. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A shape standing at the end of the hallway. Not moving, not breathing. Just there. It didn't step forward. It didn't vanish. It simply remained. He stayed awake until dawn, eyes never leaving that shadowed corner. When sunlight touched the windows, the shape was gone. The fifth night, he planned to leave. Bags packed, taxi booked, but something compelled him to stay just a little longer. He told himself he'd leave at first light, but as midnight approached, the air in the house thickened, pressing against his chest. The walls seemed closer. The mirrors now reflected things that weren't moving in sync. At 2:58 a.m., all devices shut down. Phone, laptop, lamps, total blackout. At 3 a.m., the house changed. The rooms seemed to stretch, twist. Hallways didn't lead to the same places. Doors opened into walls. Anas stumbled through the house, heart racing, trying to find the exit. Then he saw it again. The shape. This time, it stood in the kitchen, just behind the glass door. It had no face, no eyes, just the outline of something humanoid, tall and still. He turned to run, but every door led back to the same room. The shape never moved, never chased. It only waited. He collapsed on the floor, overwhelmed. Then, slowly, the house began to dim further, as if being swallowed by shadow, and just before he lost consciousness, he heard it again. The whisper, "You're home now." The next morning, the house was empty, perfectly clean, no signs of a tenant. No clothes, no computer, just an empty mattress in the bedroom and a mirror in the hallway that showed 2 reflections. One of them, not moving. No one saw Anas again. The agent's office had been shut down for years. The listing is still active, low rent, fully furnished, quiet neighborhood. The ad says move in anytime. But if you walk to the end of Ridley Lane and stand outside that last house, don't knock, don't peek in the windows, and whatever you do, don't stay past the 5th night, because once the house knows your name, you never really leave. Story 7. Imran had never believed in the supernatural. He was a photographer by profession, trained to look at details others missed, but only within the boundaries of logic. One evening, while browsing through a local flea market, he found an old Polaroid camera tucked away in a dusty wooden crate. The seller, an elderly man with trembling hands, offered it for nearly nothing. Imran didn't ask questions. He brought it home and cleaned it up, curious to see if it still worked. When he inserted fresh film and snapped a test shot of his living room, it developed perfectly. Excited by the vintage quality, he decided to document the rooms in his apartment. He took 3 more pictures, his kitchen, bedroom, and hallway, then laid them all out on his desk. That's when he noticed something strange. In the 4th picture, the hallway, there was a figure, a young girl, standing perfectly still in the far corner, half hidden in shadow. Imran blinked, then looked down the hallway itself. Empty. No one was there. He checked the photo again. The girl appeared pale, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with long black hair and a white dress. Her face was hard to make out, slightly blurred. He convinced himself it was a trick of the lighting, maybe a smudge or glitch from the old lens. He snapped another picture of the hallway to prove it. This time, the girl wasn't in it. He laughed it off, though unease lingered beneath his thoughts. He placed the first set of 4 photos in a drawer and went to bed. The next day, Imran reviewed the shots again. 3 were normal, the 4th still the same. The girl hadn't changed, but something else had. In the photo, the door behind her, his bedroom door, was slightly ajar now. When he had taken the original, it had been closed. He was certain of it. A chill crept over him. He snapped another photo of the hallway. No girl, but when he returned to the drawer out of morbid curiosity, the old photo had changed again. The girl was now closer to the foreground, her face still blurry, but her hand was raised as if reaching for something. He slammed the drawer shut and unplugged the camera. He didn't sleep well that night. On the 3rd night, his dreams were filled with static. In one of them, he saw flashes of the girl standing at the foot of his bed, whispering something he couldn't understand. The next morning, he found the drawer slightly open. Inside, the photos were untouched, but the 4th one was different again. Now, the girl's face was partially visible, just enough to show hollow, darkened eyes and a thin, unnatural smile. Her hand was now pressed against the camera's point of view, as if trying to reach through the image. The background had changed too. The hallway light in the photo was off, though in reality, it had been on. Imran threw the photo across the room and left for the day, hoping space would clear his head. He returned late that night, exhausted but unable to rest. The apartment felt heavier somehow, like the air had thickened. He tried watching TV, listening to music, anything to distract himself. But at 3:12 a.m. he heard a soft noise like footsteps moving down the hallway, slow, barefoot. He held his breath, heart pounding, and crept toward the hall. It was empty, but something on the floor caught his eye. The 4th photo, it was lying face up. The girl was now inches from the lens. Her eyes, once hollow, now stared directly forward. Imran gathered every photo and threw them into the trash. Then he smashed the old camera and tossed it into the alley bin behind his building. He left all the lights on and waited for dawn. But the nightmare didn't end. The next evening, his printer turned on by itself. It whirred and clicked, despite no connected device. A single sheet of paper slid out, grainy, dark, and unmistakable. It was the same hallway, same perspective. And the girl, now inside the apartment, behind his bedroom door, which was wide open in the photo. Imran backed away, panicked, and ran to the trash bin to retrieve the broken camera, but it was gone. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his living room with every light on, holding a kitchen knife, eyes fixed on the hallway. Nothing moved. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., the lights flickered once, and from the shadows came a sound, a soft giggle, high-pitched, close. The next morning, neighbors reported hearing screams from his unit. Police arrived to find the apartment locked from the inside. Nothing was broken. No sign of forced entry. Imran was gone. Completely vanished. But on his desk were 4 Polaroid photos, neatly arranged in a line. The first 3 were ordinary, but the 4th showed the hallway once more, empty, except for a pale hand, reaching from behind the bedroom door, and on the floor, just beside the desk, was a freshly developed 5th photo. It showed Imran standing in the hallway, looking over his shoulder in terror. Behind him, the girl, closer than ever, smiling, her face no longer blurred. The apartment has since remained empty. The landlord refuses to rent it, but once in a while, visitors say the lights in the hallway flicker just after 3:12 a.m., and sometimes, in the mail slot, someone finds a Polaroid photo. Each one shows the same thing, the same hallway, and the same girl moving slowly forward, frame by frame. Eventually she reached the door, and then, she come through. Story 8. Safiyan had only lived in the new apartment for 2 days when he noticed something strange. The building was old, and the walls were thin, but it wasn't the neighbors he heard, it was the vents. Every night, just after midnight, a faint scratching sound began, soft, slow, sometimes like nails, sometimes like breathing. The air vents ran along the ceiling of every room and led into a central duct system. He assumed it was rats, or maybe pipes. He told himself it was normal in a building this old, but part of him didn't believe that, because the sound wasn't random. It came at the same time each night, and always from above his bed. On the fourth night, he placed his phone near the vent and hit record before sleeping. In the morning, he played the audio. At first, nothing but ambient noise. Then came the scratching, but layered beneath it, faint, distorted, was what sounded like whispers. He played the recording again, slowing it down. The voice was not clear, but he could make out a phrase. "We see you." That night, he climbed onto his bed and looked into the vent with a flashlight. Dust floated like mist in the beam. It looked empty, but just as he started to climb down, he heard something. A breath, not his. He dropped the flashlight and leaped back, heart pounding. The sound continued for 2 seconds. Then silence. The next day he called maintenance, asking them to check the vents. The man showed up, looked annoyed, and spent 5 minutes tapping the grates. He shrugged, saying it was just old ductwork and not to worry. Sufyan wasn't convinced. That night he unscrewed one of the vent covers and set his phone inside to record. He left it there overnight. In the morning the phone was gone. The vent cover was still off, but the device had vanished. His room felt colder than usual, and the faint smell of something metallic lingered in the air. He reported it to building management, but they dismissed him, said he must have forgotten where he put it. That night, another phone, the replacement, captured new audio. This time the voice was louder. A child's whisper, "Don't block the way." By the 6th night, Sufyan was terrified. He had started hearing the scratching during the day, too, sometimes from the kitchen vent, sometimes in the bathroom. It followed him, room to room. He tried blasting loud music to drown it out, but it always slipped through. Late that evening, he climbed into the attic crawlspace above his unit to inspect the central duct himself. It was dark, tight, and smelled like mold and old metal. As he crawled further in, his flashlight caught something shiny. His lost phone. It was wedged deep inside the duct, screen cracked. He grabbed it and backed out quickly, but before he reached the hatch, he heard it again. Breathing. Close. From within the vent behind him, he slammed the hatch shut and didn't sleep. When he checked the recovered phone, it had been recording. The video showed only darkness for hours until the last 2 minutes. Something had crawled past the phone in the vent. A pale, human-like shape. Thin limbs, hollow eyes, not a rat, not a person. Something in between. The worst part, it had stopped beside the phone and turned toward it, as if it knew. That morning, Sufyan packed a bag and called a friend to help him move out. But when they returned that afternoon, the friend grew uneasy the moment they stepped inside. "Feels like we're being watched," he whispered. And then they heard it scratching, from all the vents at once. They left immediately. But when Sufyan got home to his parents' house that night, the noise followed. At 1:12 a.m., the familiar sound began. From the corner of his childhood bedroom, a vent on the ceiling began to hum, then scratch, then breathe. He stood frozen. The air grew colder. He stared at the vent, willing it to stay silent. But as the wind shifted, he saw something. 2 faint glimmers, eyes deep within the grate. Watching, that's when he realized. It wasn't the apartment that was haunted. It was him. Since then, no matter where he goes, the vents whisper. He's changed houses, cities, devices. Nothing stops it. At 1:12 a.m. each night, they return, watching, crawling, closer. He's blocked every vent, but they find cracks. They always find a way. And last night, his phone lit up with a notification. New recording saved. Final warning. WAV. He didn't make it. He didn't play it. He doesn't need to. Because now, even when the vents are sealed, he hears the breathing from under the bed. Story 9. Waleed moved into his uncle's old house after his death. It was a massive, creaky structure built in the 1950s, with ivy climbing the outer walls and floorboards that groaned with every step. The neighborhood was quiet, the rent was free, and the house, though old, had a certain charm. But from the first day, Waleed avoided the basement. Something about it felt off. There was a long staircase that descended into complete darkness. The light switch at the top didn't work, and when he shined his phone flashlight down, the beam seemed to be swallowed by shadows. Still, he had no reason to go down there until the breaker tripped on the 3rd night. He took a flashlight and opened the basement door. The air that rushed out was cold and musty, smelling of earth and rust. As he stepped onto the first stair, he noticed how unnaturally quiet the house became. No creaking, no wind outside. Only silence. The beam of light flickered as he descended slowly. At the bottom, the cement floor was damp, and old furniture lay draped in dusty sheets. Against the far wall stood a circuit box, next to an old wooden door he had never seen before. The door didn't match the house. It was newer, out of place, with a steel knob and a peephole strange for an interior basement wall. He ignored it and flipped the breaker. The lights returned upstairs, but as he turned to leave, he thought he heard something, 3 soft knocks coming from the other side of the door. He convinced himself it was the old house settling, though the sound had been precise, rhythmic. He didn't mention the door to anyone. But that night, just as he was drifting off, he heard the knocks again. Not from the basement but from under the floorboards, right below his bed. The pattern was identical. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. He jumped up and checked the basement door, still closed. He paced for a while and tried to sleep on the couch. The knocking didn't return, but the next morning, when he passed by the basement stairs, he noticed the basement door was open just a crack, though he had locked it the night before. On the 5th night, his curiosity overtook his fear. He went down again, this time with a crowbar and a lantern. The strange door was still there, unchanged. He stepped closer and stared through the peephole. Total darkness, but as he pulled away he noticed something. The peephole was warm, as if something on the other side had just been pressing against it. The door had no keyhole, no handle on his side, only the knob. He gripped it gently. It didn't budge, but then came the sound. A whisper, low and urgent, from behind the door. It said his name, soft but unmistakable, Waleed. Then silence. He ran up the stairs without looking back. The next day he called a locksmith to ask about sealed interior doors. He didn't mention it was in a basement. The man gave him vague answers, told him to leave it alone if it wasn't meant to be opened. That evening, he found scratches on the inside of the basement door, long, shallow marks, like fingernails scraping wood. They hadn't been there the night before. That night, the knocking returned, louder, closer, and not just 3 times dozens. Pounding, then sudden quiet. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he went down one final time, determined to document everything and call someone for help. But the door was different now. The knob was gone, and from beneath the bottom, a slow trail of black liquid was seeping across the floor. He backed away, but the basement door slammed shut behind him. The lights flickered and went out. His flashlight flickered too. He pounded the basement door, shouting, but no one answered. Then, behind him, the wooden door creaked open, only a few inches, just enough for the sound to return the whisper, this time not calling his name, but pleading, "Let me out." He turned slowly, and through the opening, he saw something. A pale hand with too many fingers, resting on the floor just inside the room. It withdrew instantly when he looked at it. Then came another whisper, "You saw me, now I see you." Suddenly, the basement door behind him burst open on its own, and he escaped, breathless. He called movers the same day and planned to leave by morning. But when he returned to the house that night to gather the last of his things, he found a note taped to his bedroom door. It was written in shaky handwriting, in ink that smelled like rust. He left the door open. He ran. He never went back. The house has remained abandoned for years, yet the power bill is still paid monthly by someone. Locals say no one lasts more than a week in there. Some claim to hear knocking from the storm drains near the property. And one night, a neighbor reported seeing a light in the basement window and a pale face staring through the glass. It wasn't Waleed, and it wasn't human. Story 10. The hotel was massive, a crumbling structure tucked into the hills outside the city. Saad was only staying the weekend, attending a conference nearby. The building was old, with red carpets that had faded to brown and chandeliers that swung slightly even without wind. The front desk clerk handed him a brass key and gave him a strange look when reading the room. Number allowed 312. It was on the 3rd floor, far from the elevators. As Saad walked down the dim hallway, he counted the numbers: 309, 310, 311, 312. And then another door. Faint gold numbers hung crookedly on the wood, 313. But when he checked the hotel's map on his phone, room 313 wasn't listed. It simply didn't exist. That night, as he settled into room 312, he couldn't stop thinking about that unmarked door. Something about its placement felt wrong. It was right next to his, but the hallway narrowed unnaturally there, like the building had been modified. Just past midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway, barefoot, slow, and steady. He peeked through the peephole. A woman in a long grey gown was standing in front of 313, knocking softly. She didn't move for nearly a full minute. Just knock, pause, knock. Then she turned, walked away, and disappeared around the corner. Curious and uneasy, Sod opened his door quietly. The hallway was empty, and room 313's door was shut, but the air near it felt colder than the rest of the hall. The next morning he asked the front desk about room 313. The clerk paused, then smiled nervously. "We don't have a room 313, she said. "Old floor plan. Probably just a storage closet." But Sod had seen the door. That night, he walked past it again. It looked identical to the other doors. Just older, dustier. He leaned closer and thought he heard something soft scratching from the other side, like nails on wood. Then a faint whisper. "Help me." He froze, backed away, returned to his room and locked the door. At exactly 3:13 a.m., his hotel room phone rang. He let it ring out. There was no voicemail, no number. When he picked up the receiver later, there was no dial tone. It was completely dead. On the third night, Sod couldn't resist. He brought a small flashlight and returned to the hallway. Room 313 looked darker now, as if the light above it had dimmed. He placed his ear against the door and waited, breathing soft and close. Then something whispered again, but this time it was a voice he recognized. His own voice, whispering, "Don't open it." He backed away in panic. But as he turned, he saw something out of the corner of his eye movement under the door, a shadow shifting, long and thin. He ran back to his room and turned on every light. But when he opened the curtains, the window no longer showed. The parking lot, it showed a brick wall. There had never been a wall there. The hotel began to change. Each hallway turn felt unfamiliar. The carpets shifted patterns. The elevators took him 2 floors that didn't match the button numbers. The staff started acting odd polite, but too quiet, too still. On the 4th night, his room phone rang again. 3:13 a.m. This time he answered, static. Then a voice that sounded almost human said, "It's open now." He leaped out of bed and ran into the hallway. Room 313's door was ajar. The inside was pitch black. He could see nothing beyond the crack. The number plate had fallen off and lay broken on the floor. Without thinking, he stepped forward, and the door slammed shut in his face. He didn't sleep. He tried checking out the next morning, but the clerk claimed his reservation was for a week. Sod knew that was wrong. He'd booked for 3 nights. His attempts to leave the building failed. Every exit led him back into the lobby. Even the stairwell circled endlessly. By the 5th night, he was desperate. He went to room 313 one last time. It was wide open. The darkness inside seemed to pulse. He stepped through the doorway, holding his breath. The air inside was ice cold and the hallway behind him vanished. The room was much larger than it should have been, walls warped. The ceiling too high, no furniture, only mirrors lined the walls, each one reflecting a different version of him. Older, younger, crying, bleeding, and then he saw her, the woman in the grey gown. She stood in the center of the room, her head twitching slightly. Her eyes were solid black. She raised her arms slowly and pointed behind him. When he turned, the mirrors were gone. There was only one reflection left, himself, standing in room 312, asleep in bed, watching from the wrong side of the glass. Then everything went dark. Sod never left the hotel. His name vanished from the reservation system. The staff denied he was ever there. Room 312 is now vacant, always available, always cheap. And room 313, still not on the map, but guests in the hallway sometimes hear knocking late at night. And if you listen closely through the walls in room 312, you might hear something breathing just inches away. Some say if you knock 3 times on room 313, the door will open. But once you walk in, you don't come back, because room 313 is not a room, it's a trap.